All right. Hello, and welcome to this week's live stream. I'm going to be covering a bunch of Incus stuff. Specifically, I noticed it's been pretty much exactly 6 weeks now since Incus has been publicly announced. So I figured I'd kind of look back at that, what happened over those past 6 weeks, and where we're going to be headed. Frankly, quite a lot has happened in just a few weeks. I mean, we're not even looking at 2 months yet. Ever since that announcement. So Incus these days is actually functional. You can install it. There are packages around. There are, starting as of yesterday, we've got the online demo website back. There's now work on cleaning up the last few things in the actual code prior to being able to effectively rebase Incus onto current LXD, and then looking at doing a release in just the next couple of weeks now. So that's all pretty exciting. And yeah, I wanted to first of all follow up on what I was showing last week when looking at the Incus package. So for those who watched that live stream, I effectively was going through the build process and showing off some initial packages I had made. That has been evolving a bit since. Now we have an actual repository with instructions and everything that does work. So you can just go there if you're using Ubuntu 20.04, 22.04, or Debian 11 or 12. You can just follow those instructions. You can install the package, and then it works. There's already been quite a few users using that, and the interesting thing with having those packages around is that it unblocks a bunch of other things. It makes it much easier for us to actually run or easily install Incus on test systems. So that's one of the first things we did, is that now instead of having to build Incus from source everywhere, we can just use those packages. They're updated daily, nice and easy for us. It also made it possible to get the demos website back online, because now I don't need to build it from source again. I can just use those packages and it just kind of works. You might also have noticed that I don't, so that's the organization for my company on GitHub, that I don't just build Incus, but also build Linux and CFS. That's kind of on purpose because, well, the biggest dependency of Incus is the Linux kernel. So it made sense to also have our own kernel builds that we have some amount of control on. And then because I like using ZFS for storage as the most featureful storage backend in Incus, it made sense to also have those packages so they can line up with the kernel. And effectively that set of 3 packages available as repositories that can easily be added to either Ubuntu or Debian systems just provides a very tight, well-tested, well-working experience that anyone can get that way. It also makes things easier on my side, like on my personal side, because for anyone who wants any kind of support or anything on Incus, it makes it possible to just be like, well, use those packages, they're the ones I'm testing, and if you are using those packages, then I can provide you with additional support than I would otherwise. So that's very convenient, and effectively all of those pieces have now fallen where they should be. The next step is going to be, once Incus has a stable release out, then there's going to be 2 repositories, one for daily builds, which is what's already out today, and another one which is going to be for stable builds. Now, looking at the packaging, there are a couple of things that have changed since. I fixed a number of bugs, mostly around virtual machines, also lighting up the package a bit, like removing a bunch of binaries and libraries that were needed. Those have been removed now. Fixing some weird race conditioning issues around virtual machines, so especially in the firmware. So inside of EDK2, there were a few issues to fix. I've also changed a bit the layout for the groups. For those familiar with LXD, we had a LXD group, and any one part of that group could control the entire system, effectively being a LXD admin. That's not great because it lets you escalate to full root privileges, which you generally don't want. So instead, with Incus, I'm doing things a bit differently. We now have a group called Incus admin that does get you full access to Incus, similar to the LXD group. And there's another group called Incus, which will very soon get you the isolated user experience. So effectively, anyone who's in the Incus group and is not in Incus admin, they'll be able to still talk to Incus. That will still function, but they're gonna be locked into a per user project with restrictions and everything in place. So that's something that we had in Nextd SudoSnap that I'm gonna be introducing back to Incus over the next few days. So I've started putting some of the infrastructure in place for that. That's pretty much what's been going on that packaging front. Now, what that made possible is effectively bringing back the demo server. So I did post a blog post this morning, kind of covering some of those steps and the technical details and everything. But basically, you can go on the Linux Containers website again, and you can hit the good old Try It Online button back from the LXD days, and just go ahead and start. It's going to take a bit longer than it did back when we were doing that for LXD, but there's a good reason for it. Instead of running a small nested LXD container, which is kind of how we were doing things before, with very, very limited resources and like a slow shared environment, this is instead creating a virtual machine on a remote LXD, remote Incus cluster. And that means that every single user gets a VM with 2 virtual CPUs. That's what we can see here. And there's 4 gigs of RAM as well. And there's 50 gigs of NVMe storage. So that's massively faster than anything we ever had when offering that for LXD. And that makes it pretty interesting because we can do a few more things now. So we can initialize the daemon by just talking to it for the first time. It's fine. It started. Obviously, launching containers, that part was already there in the instructions back in the LXD days. The instructions are mostly the same. I've just updated everything for Incus, but it's very similar to what LXD had at the time. And so it's using ZFS. That's the other thing. That virtual machine is actually using the kernel I build. It's using the Incus package. It's using the ZFS package. So all of those packages I showed, that's using all of them. And yeah, we can create containers. That's fine. That was already working perfectly fine before with LXD. But now the last instruction, that's a different one because we're creating a virtual machine. That's something we wanted to offer for quite a while with LXD, but we just couldn't because just not enough resources. This is pretty demanding, and the way we're doing it with like all of the nested stuff, that just never really worked. So things are a bit different now because instead of running nested inside of an instance running in a data center somewhere, the demo server is instead just a shim. It's just a bit of Go now that talks to a remote LXD cluster, remote Incus cluster, sorry. And that cluster is quite a bit beefier. So it is, there's actually a question in the chat for like, where are those things running? So it's running in my basement. I've got an unusual basement, I think, compared to most people, where I do have a server rack, I do have battery backup, multiple internet connections. I'm also my own ISP. I've got my own AS number, so Zably has its own AS number effectively. And that's where things are running. So I've got one server that's 45 cores of ARM CPUs. So that's not used for the online demo because this is my smallest server and it's mostly used for ARM stuff. And then I've got 2 servers, one that's an AMD EPYC 48 cores, and another one that's a dual socket 12 core 24 threads Intel server. And that's that server that's mostly used for this. So if we go look at the CPU, most likely it's gonna show some Intel Xeon V2, V3, V2, yeah. So it's slightly older Intel Xeon, but that machine can run dual 64 instances, no problem. It's got almost a terabyte of memory, so there's no issue offering that memory without any kind of provisioning or anything. Those machines, they're mostly used for things like the GitHub runners used to built the packages for Incus, the kernel, ZFS, all that stuff. It's also running most of our Jenkins runners and image building infrastructure and all that stuff that runs on those servers. Like I do have production data center environment that's not at home. That's like the actual website, the core routers, all that stuff. But it's not very financially, it doesn't make much financial sense to pay the kind of cost of power and cooling and stuff of a very safe data center environment for things that are machines where, if I need to shut them down, I just shut them down. It's not the end of the world. So that's kind of the split. Also, my home connection is like 3 gigabit symmetric, so it's not like anyone would actually notice it's not in a data center because, well, it's faster than what some people get in a data center. Anyway, for the networking side, you can actually look quickly by installing MTR. It's possible to do a trace route out of the Triad server, but otherwise everything else effectively is blocked. So it's not like you can actually access the internet other than installing packages and just poking around a tiny bit. So say we want to go, I don't know, google.com. There we go. We get to see the route for that. So we can see it's coming from my Incus cluster here, going through my first gateway home, going through one of the internet links, arriving on one of the core routers in data center, then going onto the, that's the Montreal Internet Exchange, and then onto the Google network. And it's doing all of that in, what's the minimum we got? Best 7.4 milliseconds. So anyway, that's where things are running. In the old setup, it was running in a data center, but those machines are far less beefy, so I couldn't run that kind of capacity. And yeah, now we can actually do that, which is really nice. So it means that someone can very easily try online and get both containers and virtual machines all running nicely. The rest of the demo is effectively the same as before. The main difference, I guess, is that the feedback page was mostly neglected in the past. Like people could send us feedback, but it was just ending up in a local database that nobody would read. So I did do a bunch of changes onto the demo server code base yesterday. That's this repo. And other than just porting it to function on top of Incus, which was the first thing one of the first things I did, and changing the config and stuff, I also added support for email feedback. So whenever feedback is left now, I get an email notification with the feedback, so it's easier to kind of go through it as it gets received. So that's pretty good. Did a bunch of other cleanup and specifically added support for remote servers. So that's the piece that was needed to talk to a remote cluster. So that's the new demo site. I already had, I don't know, 100 or so people play with it, so that's been nice to see. Back in the LXD days, we had tens of thousands of people whose first experience with LXD was through that website. So I'm really happy to have it back up for Incus. And again, it's running a daily build. Like if we go look at the packages, the Incus package installed in there, it's a daily build. That will probably, well, that's going to change in time to go to a stable version once we have one. But currently it works, and I will try the instructions every few days just to make sure we don't regress anything. So that's for that side of things. Now for what's kind of left to do on Incus itself. I'm just looking at the chat here. There's a question about do I have like external funding for Incus development? I don't. So it's kind of hard to get much in the way of commercial interest until an initial release. But I also don't want to rush an initial release. I want to do it right. So that's why like the past 6 weeks has been kind of focused on cleaning things up, making sure that what we end up with is something that is easily supportable, that is properly tested, doesn't have any nasty regressions or anything, that has an upgrade story for existing LXD users. So that's been the focus. I do have a number of people on GitHub who are sponsoring my work. So that's one way to kind of help with the financial side of things. It's obviously not enough to to make a living out of it. I'm kind of lucky that I do have decent savings for a little while. So I don't need money from Incus right now. But the hope is definitely that over time, we will be able to keep Incus as a fully open source project with everyone contributing to it as normal. But then I personally, through my company, can provide support on the packages I'm building, can also do some amount of sponsored work where it makes sense. So that's kind of the idea. If you're interested in paying for any of that, you can reach out. But that's kind of the idea moving forward. And the idea, obviously, is that I'm not the only one doing that we have others who can also get involved, that you can also pay for their services. Like we definitely don't want to get back into the LexD days effectively with one company behind the whole thing. We want Incus to be a proper open source project with a variety of stakeholders. And currently, while I'm the main person contributing to it, we do have a good variety of stakeholders as far as other maintainers doing reviews and merges at least. So that's good. And we're pretty tight, and we tend to communicate around the next steps. So yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, realistically, the sustainability of this whole thing, we're gonna only see in maybe 6 months to a year would be my guess for like what kind of momentum is there around it. Are some companies actually sponsoring enough that I end up making a living out of it? I do have other projects and other investments in other things to sustain myself, so it's fine. But that will eventually impact how much time I dedicate to Incus as opposed to other things. So that's kind of the short version of that. Now, for what's kind of left. Before doing a 1.0 release, we need to mostly finish moving a bunch of packages around. So that's what I've been focusing for the past little while, other than working on packaging and the demo server. We're getting close. So if we go look here at the Go packages, inside of shared, there are those files here. Those need to be reviewed, split, and moved somewhere else. So that's what I'm working on. And then the next step is going to be reviewing all of those folders here, so all of those packages. They are going to be moving as well. They're going to be most likely moving into a sub-package of the internal package, at which point the package cleanup, so to say, will be done. And that means that Incus can join all of its friends inside of the command folder. And once that's done, the actual repo restructure will be completed. And that's currently the main blocker to roll out the tool that can then track changes that occurred on the LexD side and apply them to Incus. The reason for that being simply that a lot of files have been moved, have been renamed. So I need that review tool to have a map of what the old file names were and what the new file names are now. And there's not much point in me writing that tool if the naming is going to change down the line. So that's why I've been focusing on doing all of the renaming now. And once all of that is done, then I get to write the tool and go through all of the changes that happened in LexD since the fork and apply those on top of Incus. So that's kind of the idea for the package reshuffle. Other than that, there's still the Ubuntu fan that's partly been removed. I removed it from the init command, but there's still some config options and stuff that needs to be cleared, and it needs to be added as a check to the migration tool so that it refuses to migrate if the user is currently using the fan. So that's one piece I'll be wrapping up probably this week. It's a pretty small amount of work to get that one done. The command reshuffle, that has made some progress. So the init command has been moved. So now you can do incus admin init instead of having to call the daemon to do it. So there's no more incus dinit. In fact, inside of the package, you won't be able to call incusd anymore. The only command that you can actually call is incus itself. So that part is in progress. The init command is one of them. There's another 4 or 5 that need to be moved. Thankfully, they seem to be easier. So I'm hoping that this week the others will be moved over. Then that one can go away. The tooling for import changes from canonical LexD, that's what I mentioned. I need the move commands to be done. Then I'll work on this one. And I believe most of the rest is not a release blocker. I should probably actually see, is there a label for release blocker? I need to update GitHub with those, with my usual set of labels, because those are not it. But yeah, basically, those 4 are release blockers. Those are not. The top one is about documentation hosting, which technically has been sorted. So that one, if we go to Linux containers, Incus, docs, main, there is a automatic build of the Incus doc, which you can see here. Now, so the hosted part is done. The problem, as you probably can tell, is that it says Ubuntu LXD everywhere. So there's still the documentation that has not been updated. And that's one thing I need to spend probably a solid week going page by page by page in the documentation. Doing a quick pass to just rename everything from LXD to Incus, that's pretty mechanical, that's easy. But also remove the things that no longer apply. Remove anything that's Ubuntu specific, that's Snap specific, any of that kind of stuff needs to go. And also remove any of the features that have been removed. I see in the chat there's a question around Maz, and like Maz support is one of the things that was removed. Not like there's a bunch of integration that are possible with Maz. I didn't remove all of them, but LXD used to be able to integrate with Maz to do IP address management through Maz. So effectively, you would create a physically bridged network inside of LXD. Then you would provide LXD with Maz server URL and API and a machine name. And then for each of those bridge network, you could configure what Maz subnet is tied to those network. At which point, when you create an instance, LXD would have gone to talk to Maz to get a static DHCP list created and have a database entry created for the instance. That's a feature that was added a long time ago, and as far as I know, nobody ever used it. It's a bit of a really corner case thing. And Maz also didn't do a super great job at it, because Maz, well, inside of LXD, you can have multiple projects, and you can then have the same instance name in multiple projects. You can even have the same MAC address in multiple projects, as long as they are on different networks. You can't have any of that in Maz. In Maz, the machine name is globally unique, and the MAC address is globally unique. So as soon as you have multiple instances with the same name or multiple instances with the same MAC address, the Maz integration just completely fell apart. So it never ended up being all that useful, and it's one of those things where it was a lot of effort to keep this thing working properly, testing it and keeping it in mind in designs for no real benefit. So it was removed. Now, the other way Maz can integrate with LXD is by having Maz itself create instances on LXD, effectively using LXD as a virtual machine provider. Now, that part should work. There's been no change in Incus that would make it incompatible with that Maz feature. So you should be able to go in Maz and then add an Incus server as a LXD server, and that should function just fine. And that part doesn't have any weird integration or any special logic inside of Incus for it, so that will keep on working perfectly fine. It's the other way around that never made too much sense and has been removed. Now just checking, there's another question in the chat. So there's a question around medium long term, do you see significant features that Incus still need to implement, or at this point are we mostly feature complete in maintenance mode? So it kind of depends. If all you care about is running a bunch of containers on your machine, we're probably close to feature complete, and we probably have been for a while. Now, if you think of Incus as more of a kind of public cloud in a box, you just run this thing and you have most of a public cloud API, there are still some gaps, there are still things to look at doing. like there's improvements that can be done around features like the object storage support that's been added recently. There's a bunch of things that can be done around virtual machines, especially like importing from other platforms. A bunch of things that can be done around clustering for like better scheduling, better balancing, evacuation, live migration across different physical CPU vendors or physical CPU capabilities. There's like automated recovery type stuff. There's also like probably like there's quite a lot that can still be added. There are things that are becoming blockers for some of my other side projects that I will probably be looking at adding. Thinking of things like supporting. Well, it's kind of back to cluster and scheduling and placement, but basically having the ability to say, hey, this project, the users that have access to this project don't get to run a container on a physical machine. So if they want a container, that's fine, but it's going to be run inside of a virtual machine that is itself part of the same cluster. So to the user, it's kind of transparent. They just ask, okay, I want a virtual machine. Cool, that goes on a physical machine. If they want a container, oh, okay, we don't actually trust you enough for that, so that's going to go inside of a virtual machine. Still keeping the overhead as low as possible, but adding that extra level of security. So that's one thing that I kind of need for NorthSec that we'll probably be adding soon. There's really quite a lot. Like, you know, back when I was running the LXD team at Canonical, we easily had roadmap items for the next 2 or 3 years of stuff to add. And that kind of covered everything from like, you know, better APIs to allow for better client tools like the Terraform integration, Ansible integration, that kind of stuff. APIs for like bulk operation, like how do you drive, you know, machine like clusters with tens of thousands of instances, that kind of stuff, like scalability, benchmarking, performance optimization, that kind of work. But also just on a standard system. I mean, it's only pretty recently that we added support for that unprivileged, untrusted user driving Incus. So that still needs a bunch of improvement and refinement. So yeah, there's still a lot to do. And also new hardware is coming out that will need to be integrated in some ways. Like there's always a bunch of changes, like on the GPU side, especially now around like the old AI machine learning type stuff. We have more accelerators than not purely GPUs that can support virtualization either in containers or virtual machines. There's also more coming down the line with things like CXL and like composable infrastructure type work, where that needs to be integrated with either containers or virtual machines and see how that all plays together, which a lot of it actually happens at the kernel level with somewhat limited work needed at the hypervisor or container manager level. But there's still a lot of things going on. And like as much as it's, you know, would be interesting to just be able to provide support and fixes and kind of moving and, you know, not having to spend quite that much time on this, we're not there yet. I think there's still quite a few years ahead before we end up with something that could be called feature complete for the kind of scale we're looking at anyways. So that's pretty interesting. And there was another follow-up question now on the Terraform side around like any plans for Incus. So there's a LXD Terraform provider that already exists that should work just fine on top of Incus. It's like I don't want there to necessarily be forks for all of those just for the sake of changing the name. If the LXD one works perfectly fine with Incus, there's no real reason to rename it or to fork it. Now, if things change, like if there are features of Incus that LXD doesn't want, or vice versa, then there may be a reason now to have different providers for the two. What I think we need ultimately is really just speaking about the Terraform provider, is it needs to catch up. It was created mostly with containers in mind. It can do virtual machines, but it's kind of weird. And it's missing a lot of things. It's missing all of the complex networking features we have. It's missing, I think projects are missing. There's a lot of stuff missing in there. So it would be great to see it catch up to what today's Incus can do. That would be really exciting to see, and it's something that's, you know, maybe I get to spend some time on at some point. That would be pretty cool. There's also the whole, like, you know, OpenTF versus Terraform thing going on right now. I don't think it really impacts the external providers, because ultimately they're just a binary being called, and whether it's called from OpenTF or from Terraform doesn't really matter. But it might, like maybe down the line, it will also matter there, where like Terraform and OpenTF could actually differ in some way. So yeah, like I would like to contribute more to the Terraform provider, kind of similar to what we did with Ansible, where I did contribute a number of features to it a while back. And I think the part that's going to be more important is to actually have tests on our side that make sure that whatever is supported by Ansible and by Terraform doesn't regress. Like we don't end up making a change that we don't think is like an API breaking change, but actually ends up being. Like there's this, back in the LexD days, we were doing like daily tests of like running Docker inside of LexD and that kind of stuff, specifically for that reason, to make sure that we don't accidentally break something. So I think that will be one of the main steps. I know that the LexD team was actively looking at updating both Ansible and Terraform this cycle. So it will be interesting to see what they do and kind of take things from there. Like there's not much point in duplicating work, but I don't know how far they're gonna get this cycle. So anyway, that's like a very good area for contributions and improvement. Like I'm not a Terraform expert by a long shot. I've only used it a few times myself. Like I've got some projects now that will make use of it a lot more. And so just for my own needs, I might end up updating it a fair bit. Anyway, so that's kind of the side of like Terraform and Ansible, and kind of the next steps for that. And right now, really the focus for me is getting some of those issues out of the way, getting the documentation in shape, getting the backlog. So effectively importing LexD 517 into Incus. And by the time I'm actually getting to do that, it will probably be 518. So there's going to be a fair number of changes I need to go through and import. Once that's all done, run it like maybe a week or so, make sure everything is clean and everything works, and then release the first stable release of Incus. I'm still not sure what we'll do as far as the versioning scheme. It is tempting to go with something realistic, like, you know, going 0.1 or something like that. It might make it problematic with some of the automated migration stuff from LexD, because it might look like a very, very old version of LexD, even though it's not. The good thing is that most of that has been taken care of a long time ago by not relying on versions to detect what's supported, but instead using API extension strings. So it should be okay. Ideally, I would do an Incus 0.1, 0.2 type thing, and then come the first LTS, which would be in April most likely, then go straight to 6 to line it up with the version of LXC and LXCFS that are both gonna hit 6.0 in that release. So that would line everything up nicely. We'll see. That's kind of small details, but that's something that I've been trying to figure out before I get there. Just thinking through, okay, is that going to be a problem? Right now, I know that there's one problem, which is the migration tool that I wrote in a live stream 2 weeks ago. Literally compares the LexD version with the Incus version, and makes sure that it's equal or that Incus is higher. That check obviously won't work, but that check is kind of flawed from the start, because, you know, there's no guarantee that LexD 516 is equal to Incus 516. So that test probably should go away. All right. So that's kind of where we are these days. Like, the good thing is that if you want to play with Incus and want to see where it's at, well, you can just go and do it on the website. That will just work perfectly, and you can play with it as much as you want. And, you know, after half an hour, it gets destroyed, and that's that. If you want to play with it on your own machine, it's fine. You can do it through the packages. That's what I've been using on my machines now and on a few other systems. It works fine. The migration tool is not quite there yet. it works, but I've had to do manual fixes on most of the machines I've used it on. So I want to spend a bit more time to deal with more edge cases around storage to just make it more reliable, and also reintroduce daily tests on that for like pretty complex systems. Like we need to actually have the migration tool run against like a LXD system that has all of the storage backends used at the same time, pretty much has a mix of container, VM, storage, buckets, everything, snapshots all the way, and just try to import that stuff and make sure that it all works. Because like having to manually do database fixes and database patches is never fun. It sure is not going to be fun if we have to do that at scale when people start actively migrating from LXD to Incus. So that's going to be pretty important to do. And other than that, that's pretty much all I have. Like I really wanted to use this opportunity to give like a bit of an update. Like it's been 6 weeks since Incus was announced, so get to kind of go through what happened over those past 6 weeks and where we're headed. And like considering what has been done in just 6 weeks, I'm quite looking forward to the future, because it's an insane amount of work has been done very quickly and very easily by the looks of it. Oh, there's a question around where's the cat. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Like ever since I moved to this new house, the cat has not been very, like doesn't hang out here as much as he used to. He's actually in the other room most likely, just sleeping on a cardboard box because he's being a cat. I did drag him into this room and put him on the pillow here behind me before the live stream, but then I left the room for a minute and the cat was gone. So yeah, hopefully he decides that he likes this room again and it's gonna show up in the near future. That would be nice. And see some more discussion around OpenTF and naming and that stuff. That's still all moving, and like it feels like OpenTF has a lot of backing right now, which is good to see. But you know, also it needs a few more months to see kind of how things settle. There's a question around LXD Compose, which is not something I'm particularly aware of. I can probably just Google that quickly. I think I saw it mentioned at some point on the forum, but I've never played with it myself. Okay, so LXD Compose is written in Go. So that means it's probably using the normal Go client library that we have. Oh, that seems like a pretty extensive piece of Go. Okay, so almost certainly it's using our Go package from LXD, and so that should work perfectly fine against Incus. Like there is no API breaking change. Like there's been some things being well, there are a few things that have been removed for sure. But not in a way that would break API. Like some things will be missing, but when they're missing, the API extension for them is also missing. So it just looks like you're talking to an older LXD effectively. The one change that I can think of that could make things weird is we've changed the type for the config map on the main API endpoint, moving it from a map of interfaces, so like a very non-specific type, to a map of string. But it can, like if you take the Incus value, it will still unpack perfectly fine into a map of interface, because that's less strict than what we have now. So yeah, it should work perfectly fine. No issue there. It might get weird if down the line, you know, things diverge more. If we add more features to Incus that LXD doesn't take, or vice versa, then that's where things will get weirder, because you might have a feature of a tool like LXD Compose or the Terraform provider that you run and will just not exist. So yeah, that would be, that's where things will get a bit weird, but it's also not likely to fail on any of the common stuff. Like as long as you just want to create instances, profiles, networks, that kind of stuff, it should keep working perfectly fine. All right, and just before wrap up, there's a question around like any chance of an Ask Me Anything type video. I mean, that's kind of what I've been doing for, it feels like half of this live stream at this point. So possibly. There's also been discussions before of whether to do like a office hour type stuff, like a once a week, an hour in a Google Meet or something like that for people to come and chat and ask questions. Possibly, I might end up doing that. Right now, because I want to go through as much of the backlog and things as possible to get to that first 0.1 release. And I think things will be hopefully a bit more relaxed afterwards and get to slot some of that stuff into my schedule. All right. Thanks a lot for watching this. If you do have any question around any of the variety of topics covered in this video, feel free to leave them down below in the comment section. You can also go on the community forum that's still there. There's a bunch of people around to answer your questions. Do give Incus a try, and I'll see you in the next one. I also do see another question around the LexD YouTube channel. I don't have anything. I don't have any access to that channel anymore, so that's something that was removed after I left Canonical. I don't believe there's any plan to delete any of those videos, but I also have not heard of any plans to make any new ones, which is quite unfortunate. Obviously, I'm making videos right now, so it's something that I want to keep doing for Incus moving forward. I still need to decide what I will be doing exactly with our documentation, because the documentation in LexD points to videos for just about every single topic, which is nice, but it's also all talking about LexD and LexD specific stuff. So I think there's a good chance I'm going to remove all of those links when I clean up the documentation for Incus. And in time, I will probably make new videos to cover those topics once things change a bit. So instead of doing an update video, it's going to be just like a first video on that topic on the Incus side. I think that's probably how I'm going to be like approaching that topic. But yeah, I don't believe there's any plan to delete any of the content on the LexD channel. I just also don't think that anyone on the team has much interest in spending the time to prepare and record additional videos. So it's probably just gonna be kind of rotting away, which is unfortunate, but better than being deleted, I guess. All right, so actually wrapping things up now. Again, if you've got any questions, just leave them down below in the comment section, or you can go on the community forum and ask there. If you want to give Incus a try, just go and I guess first of all, use the online demo. That's the easiest. And then if you like what you see, you can install the packages. That works perfectly fine. Just keep in mind they're daily packages, they update daily, and also they might break at any time because we don't have a stable release yet. And if you feel like supporting the project, I mean, there are different ways you can do it. Obviously, assisting other users, contributing yourself, all that kind of stuff is great. And frankly, would be amazing at this stage. Otherwise, you can also sponsor me on GitHub. That's always a way to contribute. And if you have something more substantial, like maybe on your business side or anything, feel free to get in touch and we'll see what we can do. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye, folks.